Welcome to the channel, everyone. You know, recently a big man made a big decision, President Trump, that he's decided to increase auto tariffs. And well, we're going to take a deep dive into how that's going to impact all of our lives.
That's right. We're talking about a 25% tariff on all automobiles and foreign auto parts coming into the U.S. And this all happened just this past Wednesday.
Wow. So this is big.
Oh, it's huge. And a lot of people see it as a sign of things to come, you know, a kind of prelude to even more tariffs coming down the line.
Like on what?
Well, on April 2nd, there's this thing called Liberation Day, and it's expected to bring a whole bunch of new tariffs on a ton of different imported goods, not just cars.
So this 25% hike is just the tip of the iceberg.
Could be.
And the markets are already reacting. I mean, just look at the stock prices of some of those big American car companies.
Yeah, I saw that too.
General Motors, Ford, Stellantis, their shares all dip in after-hours trading.
Yeah, and that's never a good sign. You know, it shows that there's some real concern about what this could all mean for the auto industry.
For sure, for sure. So, okay, help me understand this a bit better.
Yeah.
Initially, when this announcement dropped, things were a little unclear, right?
Yeah, the details were kind of hazy at first.
I heard something about the White House having to step in and clarify some things.
Exactly. They had to issue a fact sheet almost right after the announcement to clear up some confusion.
What was the confusion about?
Well, initially it sounded like the 25% tariff would only apply to fully assembled cars that were imported, you know, like a car was built overseas and then shipped to the U.S.
Right.
But the fact sheet clarified that it also applies to foreign-made auto parts, even if those parts are used in cars that are actually assembled here in the United States.
So even if a car is technically built in America, if some of the parts came from overseas, those parts are going to get hit with that 25% tariff.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant detail for sure. So the big question we want to tackle in this deep dive is, how are these tariffs actually going to affect you, the listener? How will this play out in your day-to-day life?
A good question.
Like, how will this affect the price you pay for your next car? What are the car companies going to do about all of this? And what does this all mean for the bigger picture of global trade?
Those are all really important points to consider. And, you know, for most people, the first thing they're going to be thinking about is their wallets, right? Because let's be real, that 25% tariff on both imported cars and foreign-made parts, that's going to make new cars more expensive.
Yeah, I saw some numbers being thrown around that were kind of scary.
Oh, yeah.
Like Auto Week was estimating that prices could jump anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000 for some models.
Wow, yeah, that's not insignificant.
And they were pretty blunt about it, too. They said these added costs will almost certainly be passed on to U.S. buyers, meaning car shoppers will be the ones footing the bill.
Absolutely. And you know, it's not just about the sticker price either. It's about choice. Jennifer Safavian from Autos Drive America, she represents a bunch of international car companies here in the U.S. And she made a really good point. She said these tariffs are going to lead to fewer options for consumers. So not only are cars going to be more expensive, but there might be fewer models available too.
So it's kind of a double whammy for car buyers.
Exactly.
And this whole thing about American cars, it gets a bit murky, right?
Oh, totally murky.
Because you might think, okay, if I just buy a car from an American brand,
yeah,
I'll avoid those tariffs.
Right.
But it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. In fact, Cars.com did this whole analysis, and they found that 8 out of the top 10 most American vehicles, meaning the cars with the most American-made parts and assembly, are actually made by companies that are owned by foreign companies.
Wow. So even if you're buying a Chevy or a Ford, there's a good chance it's not as American as you might think.
It's really fascinating how interconnected the global auto industry has become. Like, the name on the car doesn't always tell you the whole story about where it's actually coming from or who's really benefiting from its production.
And Cars.com, they even pointed out that a lot of the cars that scored high on their American-made index are actually made by these international companies who have huge operations in the U.S., providing lots of jobs and supporting communities all over the country. So ironically, these tariffs that are supposed to boost American manufacturing could end up hurting some companies that are already doing a lot of manufacturing here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation with a lot of moving parts.
For sure. And, you know, to really put things in perspective, about half of all the cars and trucks sold in the U.S. last year were imports.
That's a lot of cars.
It is. And when you look at some of the popular models that are assembled overseas, it really hits home. I'm talking about cars like the Audi Q5, the Buick Encore GX, even some Chevy Silverados, the Chrysler Pacifica, and Voyager minivans, the Ford Maverick and Bronco Sport, the Mustang Mach-E, the GMC Terrain, a bunch of Ram trucks and Volkswagens, like the Jetta, the Taos, the Tiguan, all these cars could be affected by these tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge chunk of the market.
So, okay, now let's talk about how the car companies themselves are responding to all of this. Are they just taking it lying down?
Well, it's interesting. There is a specific exemption for companies that import cars under the USMCA. That's the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement. They're going to get some special consideration, at least for now.
Until when?
Until the Commerce Department comes up with a specific process for applying those 25% duties to any parts in those cars that aren't sourced from within the USMCA.
So even within that trade agreement, there's still a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm curious, what's Trump's big picture goal with all of this? What does he want to achieve with these tariffs?
Well, he's been pretty vocal about it. He wants car companies to bring their manufacturing back to the U.S. to expand their operations here. And he's specifically called out companies that have moved production to Canada and Mexico.
So he's trying to use these tariffs as a spick to kind of force companies to come back.
Yeah, you could say that. And he's even said, quote, if you build your car in the U.S., there's no tariff, unquote. So he's laid out the incentive pretty clearly.
But I imagine the international car companies aren't too thrilled about all of this.
They're not happy about it at all. Jennifer Safavian, she argues that these tariffs are actually going to make it more expensive to produce and sell cars in the U.S., which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because if it's more expensive to do business here, companies might actually cut back on U.S. manufacturing jobs.
So it could have the opposite effect of what Trump is hoping for.
Exactly. And if we zoom out and look at the big picture of U.S. auto manufacturing, there's already been a shift happening over the last few decades. The Midwest used to be the heart of car production, but now the South has become a major hub. And then, of course, you've got Tesla out in California. These tariffs could really speed up that shift and reshape the map of the American car industry.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And we have to remember that these auto tariffs aren't happening in a vacuum. This is all part of a larger trade strategy that Trump's been rolling out. And, April 2nd, that Liberation Day we talked about earlier, that's when he's expected to slap even more tariffs on a whole bunch of imports from some of our biggest trading partners.
So this is just the beginning.
Yeah, it's a big shift in U.S. trade policy and the way Trump has been going about it, announcing tariffs and sometimes delaying them. It's really shaken things up.
Created a lot of uncertainty.
A ton of uncertainty. And, the markets don't like uncertainty. Businesses don't like uncertainty. Consumers don't like uncertainty.
So what happened?
Well, we've already seen some signs that the economy is starting to feel the effects of this uncertainty. Like the Commerce Department just reported a drop in orders for business equipment last month. First time that's happened since October. And S&P Global, they put out a report saying that U.S. manufacturing activity has slipped back into contraction, which means it's shrinking instead of growing. And they specifically pointed to rising costs for materials because of those existing tariffs as a big factor.
So the tariffs are already having a ripple effect on the economy even before these new ones go into effect.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Trump hasn't always been so gung-ho about tariffs. Remember a while back, he seemed to be listening to the concerns of U.S. car makers about the potential downsides of tariffs. And he even gave Canada and Mexico a temporary break on tariffs under the USMCA, which ended up becoming a permanent waiver.
So he's been back and forth on this issue.
He has, which makes this latest move even more significant.
So it seems like he's really committed to this strategy now.
Seems like it.
And I guess from the government's perspective, there's the potential for a lot of money to come in from these tariffs.
Yeah, Trump himself has said that these new tariffs could bring in as much as $100 billion.
Wow. So that's a lot of potential revenue for the government.
Mm-hmm.
But at what cost, right?
Exactly. That's the big question here.
So, okay, let's bring it all home for our listeners.
Yeah.
If all of this comes to pass, what can people realistically expect to see happen?
Well, if you're thinking about buying a new car anytime soon, especially an import or even a domestic car that uses a lot of foreign parts, be prepared to pay more. Your choices might be more limited too. And the overall economy is likely to be a bit rockier as these trade policies play out.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener? It's a lot to take in.
I know. But think about it this way. How might these policies affect your own choices when it comes to transportation?
Mm-hmm.
Will you hold on to your current car longer? Will you reconsider the type of car you were thinking about buying? Maybe start looking more closely at cars with more American-made parts. And beyond your personal decisions, think about the big picture. What could these kinds of trade actions mean for the global economy? How are other countries going to react? What will be the ripple effects on other industries and on global trade relationships in general? It's a complex situation with far-reaching consequences, and we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on how it all unfolds.
For sure, this is something we'll have to revisit as things develop. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.